They didn't start as legends. They didn't begin with sold-out stadiums, global headlines, or millions chanting their name. They began as 7 young men in South Korea, unknown, underestimated, and standing at the edge of an industry that rarely forgives failure. Before the world knew them as BTS, they were simply dreamers pushing against an invisible wall. A wall built from rigid expectations, industry stereotypes, and a system that told them who they were supposed to be before they even had a chance to decide for themselves. In a country where perfection is demanded and individuality is often discouraged, these 7 chose a dangerous path, the path of honesty. What followed wasn't instant success. It was struggle, doubt, long nights in cramped dorms, endless rehearsals that blurred into early mornings, moments where quitting felt easier than continuing, and yet they stayed. Because BTS was never meant to be just a band. From the very beginning, their name carried weight. Bangtan Sonyeondan, Bulletproof Boy Scouts, was not a gimmick. It was a declaration, a promise to shield themselves and their listeners from the bullets of criticism, pressure, and societal judgment. Every lyric, every performance, every step forward was an act of quiet resistance. But what no one could predict was how far that resistance would travel. As their music spread beyond Seoul, beyond South Korea, beyond language itself, something extraordinary happened. Fans didn't just listen, they connected. They saw themselves in the lyrics, their fears, their anxieties, their hunger for meaning in a world that constantly tells them they are not enough. Soon, BTS was no longer performing for audiences. They were speaking with them. Millions answered that call. From bedrooms to classrooms, from city streets to online communities spanning every continent, a global fandom was born army. Not passive supporters, but participants in a movement built on empathy, self-acceptance, and resilience. And this is where the story shifts. Because BTS didn't rise by following the rules, they challenged them. They talked openly about mental health when it was still taboo. They questioned education systems, social hierarchies, and the definition of success itself. In an industry built on polished images, they chose vulnerability. In a culture obsessed with perfection, they chose truth. Awards followed, records shattered, barriers fell. Yet with every milestone came new pressure, new scrutiny, new expectations that threatened to crush what made them different in the first place. The higher they climbed, the heavier the weight became. This is not just the story of fame. This is the story of transformation, of boys becoming men under the world's microscope, of artists who refused to be silenced, of a group that turned music into a lifeline for millions who felt unseen. This documentary is not about how BTS became famous. It is about why they mattered. From humble beginnings to global domination, from underground ciphers to world stages, from doubt to destiny, this is the untold journey of BTS. Every legend has a beginning, but not every beginning looks like destiny. Before the world knew the name BTS, before charts, awards, and stadium lights, there was uncertainty. There were cracked mirrors in small practice rooms, worn-out sneakers on hard floors, and young men staring at ceilings late at night wondering if their dreams were foolish. In an industry that thrives on perfection, these 7 were far from perfect, and that was exactly the problem. South Korea's entertainment system is unforgiving. Trainees are recruited young, molded relentlessly, and discarded quietly if they fail to meet impossible standards. Many never debut, even fewer survive, and those who do are often expected to follow strict rules. Sing what you're given, say what you're told, be who you're designed to be. BTS entered this system as outsiders. They did not come from a powerful agency with endless resources. Their company was small, financially unstable, and barely visible in a market dominated by industry giants. Success was not guaranteed. In fact, failure was the more realistic outcome. From the start, they were fighting uphill, not only against competitors, but against an industry that didn't quite know what to do with them. The group began forming around one member, an underground rapper known for sharp lyrics and an intellect that went beyond music. The original plan was simple: build a hip-hop group. But as auditions continued, something unexpected happened. Instead of recruiting identical personalities, the company found individuals, different backgrounds, different voices, different temperaments. Some danced before they sang. Some wrote before they performed. Some doubted themselves more than anyone else ever could. They were not uniform, they were not polished, they were human. Training was brutal. Days began early and ended long after midnight. Physical exhaustion became normal. Injuries were ignored. Mistakes were magnified. There were moments of resentment, frustration, and fear. Fear that no matter how hard they worked, it wouldn't be enough. They lived together in cramped dorms where privacy didn't exist. Personal struggles couldn't be hidden. When one member faltered, the rest felt it. When one improved, it raised the standard for all. Bonds were forged not through comfort, but through shared survival. What made BTS different during these years wasn't just discipline, it was involvement. Unlike most trainees, they weren't separated from the creative process. They wrote lyrics about their own experiences. They questioned themes. They pushed back when something felt dishonest. That alone was risky. In a system built on control, asking for a voice can cost you your place. But they persisted. Their frustrations with academic pressure, social expectations, and the fear of becoming insignificant adults bled into their music. These weren't abstract ideas. They were lived realities. And slowly, that authenticity became the group's core identity. When BTS finally debuted, there was no explosion, no instant superstardom. Their first release didn't dominate sales charts. Critics didn't immediately crown them the future of K-pop. In fact, many didn't know what to make of them. Their sound was raw. Their message was confrontational. Their image didn't align neatly with what audiences were used to seeing. But beneath the modest numbers, something far more important was happening. Listeners were paying attention. Their debut music spoke directly to youth anxiety, fear of failure, pressure from parents, the feeling of being trapped in someone else's dream. These were topics rarely addressed openly in mainstream K-pop, especially not by rookies. For some, it was uncomfortable. For others, it was a relief. As BTS began appearing on music shows, their performances stood out, not because they were flawless, but because they felt urgent. Their movements were sharp. Their expressions carried weight. It felt less like entertainment and more like a statement. They were criticized, mocked, dismissed as too aggressive, too different. But they didn't retreat. Instead, they doubled down. They continued releasing music that challenged expectations, refusing to dilute their message for safety. They leaned into their identity as outsiders, embracing the metaphor that would define them, bulletproof. Not invincible, but resilient, willing to take hits and keep moving forward. At this stage, BTS was still unknown internationally. Even domestically, they were far from mainstream. Yet something crucial had already formed, a foundation built on honesty, brotherhood, and defiance. They weren't chasing fame. They were chasing meaning. And without realizing it, they were laying the groundwork for a movement that would eventually reach far beyond South Korea. But that future was still distant. For now, survival was the goal. Growth was uncertain. The industry was watching, but not yet listening. This was the phase where many groups disappear. This was where BTS refused to. Because before the rise, before the records, before the global phenomenon, there was this moment. 7 young men standing against a system that wasn't designed for them. And choosing, against all odds, to keep going. Survival was only the first battle. The next was identity. After their debut, BTS stood at a crossroads familiar to many young artists. They could soften their edges, follow the trends, and blend into the industry's expectations. Or they could lean further into what made them different, even if it meant risking everything they had worked for. They chose the risk. Rather than retreating from criticism, BTS sharpened their message. Their music began to sound less like an introduction and more like a confrontation. Each release added another layer to a growing narrative, one centered on youth caught between dreams and reality. This wasn't accidental. It was deliberate storytelling. At a time when most idol groups avoided uncomfortable truths, BTS leaned directly into them. Their songs spoke about the pressure to succeed, the suffocating education system, the fear of becoming ordinary, and the quiet anger felt by a generation told to endure without complaint. These were not metaphors designed for radio play. These were reflections of lived experience. And young listeners recognized it immediately. Fans didn't just stream the music. They analyzed the lyrics. They discussed the themes. They shared stories of their own struggles in comment sections and online forums. Slowly, an emotional bridge formed between artist and audience, one built not on fantasy, but on understanding. This was the beginning of something powerful. BTS's image during this period was unapologetic. School uniforms became symbols of rebellion rather than conformity. Choreography carried aggression and urgency. Their stage presence was intense, sometimes even unsettling, because it wasn't meant to be comfortable. They were speaking to those who felt unheard. Yet BTS was never only anger. Alongside frustration, they revealed vulnerability. Behind the sharp performances were moments of doubt, humor, and self-awareness. Through behind-the-scenes content and variety appearances, audiences saw a different side. Young men laughing, failing, teasing each other, and openly admitting their insecurities. That balance mattered. It humanized them. They weren't distant idols living behind polished facades. They were relatable, sometimes awkward, sometimes unsure, always trying. That authenticity deepened trust. Fans didn't feel like spectators, they felt like companions on the journey. As their confidence grew, so did their ambition. Their music expanded thematically, exploring not just external pressure, but internal conflict. Songs began to question identity itself. Who am I without expectations? What happens when dreams clash with reality? Is success worth losing yourself? These weren't questions with easy answers, and BTS didn't pretend they had them. Instead, they invited listeners into the uncertainty. And the world began listening. International fans started discovering BTS through social media, reaction videos, and shared links. Language was no longer a barrier. Emotion carried meaning across borders. The struggles of Korean youth mirrored those felt by young people everywhere, from North America to Europe, from Latin America to Southeast Asia. The internet became their amplifier. Without massive radio play or Western promotion, BTS's presence grew organically. Fans translated lyrics voluntarily. They explained cultural context. They introduced BTS to friends, classmates, and online communities. This wasn't marketing, it was belief. During this period, BTS also embraced storytelling beyond music. Their visuals became layered with symbolism. Music videos hinted at interconnected narratives. Themes repeated and evolved. Fans were encouraged not just to listen, but to interpret. This transformed passive consumption into active engagement. Suddenly, being a fan meant more than buying albums. It meant decoding messages, sharing theories, and feeling emotionally invested in the group's growth. A shared universe was forming, one where BTS's story and the audience's experiences overlapped. And then came recognition. Awards for new artists began to appear. Media attention increased. Industry insiders started paying closer attention. BTS was no longer invisible, but with attention came pressure, the expectation to conform, to simplify, to play it safe. Once again, BTS refused. Instead of abandoning their roots, they refined them. Their sound matured. Their lyrics became more introspective. The rebellion evolved not as defiance for its own sake, but as reflection. Youth wasn't just angry anymore. It was confused, lonely, searching. This shift marked a turning point. BTS began moving from protest to contemplation, from shouting to questioning. They weren't rejecting society outright. They were examining it and themselves within it. Fans grew with them. As BTS's message deepened, so did the emotional bond with their audience. Many fans described the music as a mirror, reflecting feelings they couldn't articulate on their own. In classrooms, dorm rooms, and bedrooms across the world, BTS became a quiet companion during moments of doubt. At this stage, BTS was still not a global headline. They hadn't broken major international records yet, but something far more important had happened. They had found their voice. And that voice, honest, evolving, and unafraid, was beginning to echo far beyond where it started. What came next would push them out of the shadows and onto the world's stage. But that rise was built on these years of connection, courage, and an unbreakable bond with those who chose to listen. Every movement reaches a moment where momentum becomes unavoidable. For BTS, that moment did not arrive suddenly. It arrived like a slow-burning fuse that finally met fire. By the mid-2010s, BTS was no longer fighting to be heard. They were fighting to be understood. The shift began quietly. Their music softened in sound but sharpened in meaning. The anger of youth evolved into reflection. The rebellion matured into self-examination. Where earlier songs demanded change from the outside world, these new works turned inward, toward identity, loss, love, and the fear of growing up too fast. This was not an easy transition. In the idol industry, growth is dangerous. Fans often cling to the version of artists they first fell in love with. Change risks alienation. But BTS understood something crucial. Stagnation was the greater threat. To stay honest, they had to evolve, even if it meant leaving comfort behind. Their work during this period captured the fragility of youth in transition. Songs explored fleeting happiness, emotional isolation, and the quiet grief of realizing that innocence does not last forever. Success was no longer portrayed as a finish line. It was portrayed as a question mark. And audiences responded. For the first time, BTS began achieving milestones that extended beyond niche fandoms. Albums climbed higher on charts. Music videos spread rapidly across platforms. International press began asking questions, not about trends, but about meaning. Who were these artists? Why did their music feel different? The answer lay in storytelling. BTS had transformed their discography into a narrative, one that mirrored real life. Youth wasn't romanticized. Pain wasn't glorified. Growth was shown as confusing, beautiful, and deeply uncomfortable. This honesty resonated across cultures because it reflected a universal truth. Growing up is not a victory, it's a process. As the group's themes deepened, so did their performances. Stages became theatrical. Choreography carried symbolism. Visuals were layered with literary and artistic references. Every detail felt intentional, as if each comeback was another chapter rather than a standalone release. Fans noticed everything. They paused frames. They traced connections. They debated meanings late into the night. What emerged was not just admiration, but participation. BTS was no longer just producing content. They were inviting audiences into interpretation. This participatory culture became one of their greatest strengths. At the same time, BTS began stepping onto international stages. Small overseas venues turned into sold-out shows. Cities outside South Korea echoed with lyrics sung in Korean by fans who didn't speak the language fluently, but felt the emotion fluently. Language barriers collapsed under shared experience. The group's first international tour were proof of something industry executives had underestimated. Global audiences were hungry for authenticity. They didn't need translation to understand vulnerability. They didn't need familiarity to feel connection. BTS was becoming a bridge. With this expansion came new pressure. Western markets are notoriously resistant to non-English artists. Radio play was limited. Media skepticism was high. Many viewed BTS as a temporary novelty rather than a lasting presence. But BTS didn't chase validation. They stayed focused on craft. Each release became more ambitious. Music blended genres without apology. Hip-hop roots intertwined with pop melodies, electronic textures, and emotional ballads. The result wasn't confusion, it was identity. BTS wasn't trying to sound global. They were simply being themselves on a larger stage. And then came the breakthrough moment. When their music finally penetrated major international charts, it wasn't just a win for the group, it was a disruption. Industry norms were challenged. Assumptions about language, marketability, and audience behavior were suddenly outdated. This success was not driven by traditional promotion. It was driven by fans. ARMY had grown into a coordinated, passionate force, streaming, sharing, translating, organizing. But more importantly, they believed, not just in BTS as performers, but in the message they carried. Self-acceptance, persistence, emotional honesty. As BTS gained global recognition, they remained grounded in that message. They spoke openly about fear, burnout, and the cost of ambition. They refused to pretend that success erased insecurity. Instead, they framed it as something that amplified it. This transparency set them apart. Where many artists hid vulnerability behind status, BTS brought it to the forefront. They reminded fans that feeling lost does not disappear with achievement. That self-love is not a destination, but a continuous effort. That honesty came with risks. The higher BTS climbed, the louder criticism grew. Scrutiny intensified. Every word was analyzed. Every action magnified. The margin for error shrank. Yet BTS did not retreat into silence. They expanded their vision. Their music began addressing not only personal struggles, but collective ones: alienation, societal pressure, and emotional fatigue in a rapidly changing world. Their concerts transformed into communal experiences, places where thousands gathered not just to watch, but to feel understood together. This was no longer just entertainment. It was catharsis. By the end of this phase, BTS was no longer an underdog. They were contenders on the world stage, but the journey had changed them. Fame did not erase their questions, it deepened them. They had crossed an invisible line. From this point forward, nothing about their lives or their impact would be small again. And the world was only beginning to realize what they had unleashed. There is a moment in every extraordinary rise when success stops feeling like victory and starts feeling like weight. For BTS, that moment arrived when the world no longer asked who they were, but what they represented. By now, their presence was undeniable. Records fell one after another. Charts across continents reflected their reach. Venues grew from theaters to arenas, and from arenas to stadiums once reserved for the most established global icons. Their name was no longer whispered. It was chanted in unison by tens of thousands, in cities thousands of miles from where their journey began. But with that scale came expectation. BTS was no longer seen as just a group of musicians. They were held up as representatives of K-pop, of Korean culture, of youth itself. Every move was scrutinized not only as entertainment, but as symbolism. The same authenticity that had propelled them forward now carried consequences far beyond music. They understood this. Rather than shrinking from responsibility, BTS expanded their purpose. Their work during this era turned inward and outward at the same time. Albums explored the cost of ambition, the seduction of success, and the danger of losing oneself in applause. Lyrics reflected temptation, fear, and self-examination, asking what happens when the dream comes true and the emptiness still lingers. This was not celebratory music. It was cautionary. They spoke about shadows, the parts of oneself that grow darker under spotlight. They acknowledged that fame amplifies insecurity as much as confidence. That validation, when external, can become addictive. These themes resonated deeply with fans navigating their own transitions into adulthood. As BTS grappled with their own growth, their connection with their audience evolved. The message shifted from defiance to reassurance, from fight the world to you are not alone. That phrase became more than a lyric. It became a promise. On stage, concerts transformed into emotional experiences. Thousands sang together not for spectacle, but for solidarity. For many fans, these gatherings felt like safe spaces, rare moments where vulnerability was shared openly without judgment. Behind the scenes, however, the pressure was relentless. Schedules tightened, travel intensified, physical and mental fatigue became constant companions. The world demanded more music, more appearances, more perfection. And BTS, known for giving everything, pushed themselves to meet those expectations. Yet they refused to hide the toll. Members spoke openly about burnout, anxiety, and self-doubt. In an industry that often demands silence around mental health, their honesty was radical. They reminded fans, and themselves, that strength includes acknowledging weakness. This transparency deepened trust. As BTS's influence grew, so did their platform. Invitations arrived from places far beyond the music industry. Cultural institutions, global organizations, and world leaders took notice. BTS wasn't just shaping pop culture, they were shaping conversations. When they spoke about self-love, it echoed in classrooms and communities. When they addressed youth struggles, it reached policymakers and educators. Their message, once dismissed as niche, now carried global weight. They used it carefully. Rather than preaching, BTS spoke from experience. They framed self-acceptance not as positivity, but as survival. They acknowledged pain instead of dismissing it. This grounded approach made their influence feel earned rather than imposed. But being a symbol is exhausting. The same spotlight that amplifies impact also magnifies missteps. Every controversy, every misunderstanding, every cultural difference became a potential fault line. BTS faced moments where the world misunderstood them, where actions were stripped of context and magnified beyond intention. They learned quickly that global visibility leaves little room for error. Still, they didn't retreat. Instead, they refined their communication, strengthened their principles, and continued forward. Their resilience wasn't loud, it was steady. They remained focused on what had always defined them: sincerity. As the years passed, BTS reached heights few artists ever experience. Awards once thought unreachable became routine. Industry milestones became stepping stones. Yet the question that lingered beneath it all was simple and heavy. How long can this last? Behind the scenes, discussions about the future grew more serious. The members were no longer teenagers chasing dreams. They were adults facing realities, personal goals, physical limits, and obligations that fame could not erase. Among those realities was separation. Mandatory service, individual aspirations, and the need for rest loomed over the group's future. Fans sensed the tension, not fear of disappearance, but fear of change. BTS had grown alongside them. The thought of distance felt personal. The group addressed this with honesty. They made it clear that evolution does not mean abandonment. That growth sometimes requires stepping back, not walking away. This reassurance mattered deeply, especially to a fandom that had grown with them through every chapter. As BTS stood at the peak of global influence, they faced a paradox. They had achieved everything they once dreamed of, yet the path forward was uncertain. And perhaps that uncertainty was the most honest place they had ever been. Because BTS was never about having all the answers. It was about asking the right questions and inviting the world to ask them too. Every story that changes the world eventually reaches a quiet moment. Not an ending, but a pause. For BTS, that moment arrived not with failure or decline, but with honesty. After years of constant movement, albums, tour, records, and relentless global attention, the question was no longer how far they could go, but how they could continue without losing themselves. They had given everything. From their youth to their energy, from their private struggles to their public victories, BTS had lived in full view of the world. And while the spotlight brought opportunity, it also demanded sacrifice. Time became fragmented, rest became rare, identity blurred under expectation. So when BTS spoke about stepping back from group activities to focus on individual paths, the world reacted with shock. Headlines speculated, markets reacted, fans held their breath. But beneath the noise, the truth was simple. This was not an ending. It was preservation. For the first time, BTS chose longevity over momentum. They acknowledged what many artists never say out loud, that constant creation without reflection leads to erosion. That growth sometimes requires distance. That strength includes knowing when to pause. Each member began exploring their own voice more fully. Solo projects weren't departures from the group's message, they were extensions of it. Different sounds, different perspectives, different stories, all rooted in the same values that had defined BTS from the beginning. Authenticity, vulnerability, purpose. Meanwhile, the bond between BTS and their fans did not weaken. If anything, it matured. The relationship shifted from constant presence to mutual trust. Fans understood that waiting was not abandonment, it was faith. And that faith was rewarded. Even during periods of separation, BTS's influence did not fade. Their music continued to chart. Their past performances continued to inspire. New fans discovered their discography not as trends, but as timeless reflections of youth, growth, and resilience. The impact they had made was already irreversible. Beyond music, BTS's legacy expanded into culture, language, and identity. They had helped normalize conversations about mental health in spaces where silence once dominated. They had shown that non-English voices could lead global conversations without compromise. They had proven that sincerity could scale. They changed the industry without asking permission. They also changed what success looked like. Success in the BTS model was not domination, it was connection. Not perfection, but honesty. Not control, but trust. This reframing influenced not only fans, but future artists watching from the sidelines, realizing that there was another way forward. As time passed, one truth became undeniable. BTS was no longer defined by activity or absence. They were defined by impact. Mandatory obligations, time apart, and uncertainty did not erase what they built. If anything, it revealed how strong the foundation truly was. A phenomenon does not vanish because it pauses. A movement does not dissolve because it evolves. And BTS had always been a movement. When discussions of reunion surfaced, they weren't framed as comebacks, but as continuations. Not returning to who they were, but meeting again as who they had become. Older, wiser, changed. And that anticipation carried meaning. Because BTS never promised permanence in form, they promised permanence in spirit. Their story was never about 7 people staying frozen in time. It was about growth, painful, beautiful, inevitable. From boys defying expectations to men redefining influence, the journey remained consistent in its core message. You are allowed to struggle. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to keep going. That message outlived any chart position. As the documentary closes, the question is no longer what BTS achieved, but what they made possible. For fans who felt unseen, for artists who felt constrained, for a generation told to endure quietly. BTS gave them language. And as they move forward, together or apart, loudly or quietly, their presence remains woven into global culture. Not as idols placed above humanity, but as humans who dared to speak honestly while the world was listening. This is not the end of BTS. It is proof that their name was always a promise. Bulletproof against doubt. Beyond the scene of expectation. Moving forward always. Because, as they once reminded the world, life goes on. As this journey comes to a pause, one truth remains impossible to ignore. BTS was never just something to watch. They were something to experience. What began as 7 young men standing quietly against an unforgiving system transformed into a global language of resilience, honesty, and self-belief. Their rise did not happen because the world was ready. It happened because they were willing to speak when silence was safer, to change when comfort was easier, and to stay human when expectation demanded perfection. And now, the story turns outward to you. Because BTS's legacy does not live solely in albums, awards, or sold-out stadiums. It lives in the people who listened, in the ones who felt understood for the first time, in the moments when a lyric arrived exactly when it was needed, in the courage to keep going on days when quitting felt inevitable. This is where the story becomes shared. If you've ever felt pressure to fit a mold that was never meant for you, if you've ever questioned your worth because you didn't move fast enough, shine bright enough, or succeed loud enough, if you've ever felt lost in the space between who you were and who you're becoming, then this story was never just about BTS. It was about you. And that is why this documentary does not end with finality. It ends with invitation. An invitation to reflect, to remember where you started, to acknowledge how far you've come, even if the distance feels invisible. BTS never offered easy answers. They offered honesty. They reminded us that growth is messy, progress is nonlinear, and self-love is not a destination, it is a practice. One that requires patience, forgiveness, and the courage to face yourself without armor. So here is the call to action, not as a command, but as a choice. Carry the message forward. Let the music you love remind you that your voice matters, even when it shakes. Let the story of 7 ordinary individuals achieving the extraordinary remind you that beginnings do not determine endings, that systems can be challenged, that labels can be rewritten, that identity is not fixed, it evolves. And if this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Talk about it. Share it. Pass it on to someone who might need it more than you did. Because stories gain power when they are retold, not as myths, but as reminders. BTS showed us that influence does not come from dominance. It comes from connection, from sincerity, from the courage to say, I'm struggling, in a world obsessed with appearing strong. As fans, listeners, and witnesses to this journey, the responsibility now shifts. Not to replicate what BTS did, but to apply what they stood for, to choose authenticity over acceptance, to value growth over approval, to believe that your story, too, has meaning. And as the future unfolds, uncertain, unpredictable, and full of change, remember this. Pauses are not endings. Distance is not disappearance. Change is not loss. BTS taught us that forward movement doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like reflection. Sometimes it looks like rest. Sometimes it looks like choosing yourself after years of choosing the world. So as the screen fades and the music softens, the final message is simple, but enduring. Stay curious. Stay honest. Stay human. Because if 7 young men from a small company could change the global conversation by staying true to themselves, then possibility is far wider than we've been taught to believe. This was not just the history, life, and career of BTS. It was proof that stories, when told with truth, can become lifelines. And the next chapter, that's yours to write.